Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Isaacs, Vice President of Government Affairs with the Portland Business Alliance, Greater Portland's Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for joining us today for our COVID-19 Recovery Roundtable. Everyone here at the Alliance hopes you are staying safe and healthy. While our region continues to navigate the COVID-19 pandemic, we encourage everyone to practice physical distancing and help all of us contain this pandemic by wearing your mask. During this COVID-19 pandemic, we continue to work diligently and being a resource for our community. We've set up a page that is COVID-19 focused and is updated frequently. You can also follow us on social media for updates, and you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and elsewhere. A recording of this presentation and links for resources mentioned will be available on our website shortly after we wrap up this afternoon. Of course, none of these events could happen without the support of our co-hosts and members. And we want to start because we have an incredible sponsor that we want to thank today, US Bank. And I would like to introduce Suzanne Kuhn from US Bank to say a few words. Welcome, Suzanne.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Susie Kuhn, and I lead a team of bankers in our business banking group here in Portland. As you might know, US Bank was founded in Oregon in 1891 and has a long history of serving businesses of all sizes across this region. US Bank is also one of Oregon's most philanthropic companies and provides living wages to 5,000 employees in the Portland metro area and across the state. Thinking about today's topic about COVID recovery, I know that we are a vested stakeholder. I'm proud that many of the thousands of our local employees immediately pivoted over the last handful of months by volunteering time and energy to helping our small business community navigate the SBA PPP process and thereby successfully processing thousands of applications. Thank you, PBA, for hosting this important discussion, and thanks for having us.
Great, thank you so much, Suzanne. And now I'd like to take a moment to recognize our co-hosts for today's events. We want to say thank you to Columbia River Economic Development Council, Oregon Small Business United, the Portland Business Alliance Small Business Council, and Strategies 360. Thank you all. I would now like to welcome Diana Kanamaki, the Alliance Executive Board Member and Chair of our Small Business Council, who are also sponsoring today's event. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you, John. My name is Diana Kanamaki, and I'm the founder and president of Fuse7 Marketing. We help clients grow their businesses online through paid search, ads, social media initiatives, and web development and award-winning content strategies. We are also an Oregon certified women business enterprise. We also wanted to share with you that as I stand in as chair of the Portland Business Alliance Small Business Council. The Small Business Council is pleased to be one of the sponsors for today's critical COVID-19 roundtable discussions. I want to thank all of our co-hosts and panelists for today's events, especially one of our partners, Oregon Small Business United. Enacting a third round of federal stimulus is absolutely critical for small businesses, which have been hit the hardest by the COVID-19 pandemic. Small businesses are disproportionately BIPOC owned, making additional congressional action critical to mitigating the inequitable impacts of the pandemic. The PBA Small Business Council is the voice of small business within the Greater Alliance organization. 80% of PBA's approximately 1,900 members are small businesses. It is our job to both advocate for small businesses with elected officials and hold the Alliance, the largest business network in the entire state of Oregon, accountable to make sure that this is meeting the needs of small businesses. As the chair of the Small Business Council, I sit on both the executive committee and board of directors of the Alliance. The Small Business Council focus has been and will continue to be focused on advocating for small businesses during the unprecedented public health and economic crisis. We are pleased to play a role in the formation of the city's Healthy Business Toolkit, which has resulted in over 700 businesses applying for permits to expand their business onto sidewalks and the parking right of way. By comparison, Seattle has had less than 100 applicants for a similar program. And we were extremely proud of the role the Alliance has played in donating over $1 million to get the City of Portland's Small Business Relief Fund off the ground. The fund has recently been replenished with $14 million in CARES Act funds, which is a perfect example of why further congressional action is so critical. We hope you will visit the portlandalliance.com website to get involved with the Portland Business Alliance and the Small Business Council in the coming year. And for that, we hope you enjoy today's program.
Great. Thank you, Diane, and to all our members serving on the Portland Business Alliance Small Business Council. I'd now like to welcome Crystal Ellerby, Vice President of Federal Relations with Strategies 360, to get our program started. Welcome, Crystal.
Good afternoon. My name is Crystal Ellerby. I'm Vice President of Federal Relations at Strategies 360 in Washington, D.C. Today, I'm going to be focusing on providing you with an overview and the state of play that is currently happening on Capitol Hill regarding the next COVID-19 emergency relief packet. Specifically, I will focus on two separate bills. One, H.R. 6800, the HEROES Act, that was passed by the House on May 15, and it would provide $3.4 trillion. And the second bill is S-178, delivering immediate relief to America's Families, Schools, and Small Businesses Act. This is also known as the Senate Republican Skinny Bill, and it would provide funding at a total of $487 billion. It has been over 3 months since the House passed the HEROES Act. At the present, the negotiations for the next COVID-19 emergency relief package have stalled. Parties have not met in weeks. The Senate GOP did, however, on July 27th, introduce the HEALS Act. That consisted of a package of 6 separate bills that relate to several different provisions to provide relief because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But the last one that I just mentioned earlier is S-178, the Senate Republican Skinny Bill. And I want to focus on the provisions in the HEROES Act and in the Skinny Bills Act. And I know a lot of the participants on this webinar want to talk about unemployment insurance and the PPP program, PPP. Let's start with unemployment insurance. In the Senate Republican Skinny Bill, they do extend the federal pandemic unemployment compensation supplemental payments from July 31st to December 27th, 2020, at a lower rate at $300 per week. The HEROES Act does extend enhancements that were included in the CARES Act to create soft cutoffs. Workers will be able to apply for these benefits through January 31st, 2021, and continue to receive benefits until March 31st, 2021. That total is $437 billion. Within that $437 billion, $925 million will be provided to states to assist them in processing unemployment insurance claims that have been held up in the various states. Let's talk about the PPP program, because that's also an important program for folks that are on this call this afternoon. Now, everybody has been talking about how it has been some confusion with regards to the PPP. Well, under the Senate Republican Skinny Bill, they do extend it to the end of 2020. They also allow forgivable portion of the PPP loans to be used for more than non-payroll expenses. And they also expand the eligibility for 501c6, which is non-lobbying organizations such as small chambers of commerce. They also would provide $257.7 billion in the new appropriations for PPP loans. In the HEROES Act, they do extend PPP through the end of 2020. Now let's talk about direct stimulus payments to individuals. Now under the Skinny Bill, there is no provision with regards to that. But under the HEROES Act, $1,200 or a refundable tax credit for each family member. The credit is $1,200 for a single taxpayer, $2,400 for joint filers. And also remember, at a maximum of 3 dependents will also be able to receive $1,200. Also, I would like to talk about within the Skinny Bill, the Republican bill, they really focused on legal immunity. They want to make sure that any COVID-19 related lawsuits against schools, medical providers, and businesses that fail to protect students, patients, customers, and workers from the global pandemic. There is no such provision in the HEROES Act. Now let's talk about some education provisions. I know that a few of you are interested in the funding that is in the skinny bill from the Senate Republicans. They provide $105 billion aid for schools. $70 billion will go to elementary and secondary schools. $29 billion will go to colleges and universities. $5 billion will go to governors to use at their discretion for early childhood, K through 12, or higher education. $525 million for the Bureau of Indian Education. Under the HEROES Act, there is a state fiscal stabilization fund, $90 billion for elementary and secondary schools and public post-secondary institutions. And also there is another provision for higher education. They will provide $10.15 billion. And also there is another provision that is important to state and local governments. Now in the Senate Republican skinny bill, there is no such provision. However, in the HEROES Act, there is continued funding under the state and local tribal government coronavirus relief fund. And also they have taken out that provision that excluded cities and counties that had populations under 500,000. So now everybody will be able to get direct funding. Now let's talk about what lately has been going on and what have been the major sticking points. The main points for both everyone in this negotiation process has been the level of funding. Speaker Pelosi has always made it abundantly clear that the HEROES Act and the $3.4 trillion is where she and her caucus were going to stand. However, White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and Treasury Secretary Mnuchin have stated that they only want $1.1 trillion. And they also believe that there has been funding in the CARES Act that have been distributed, but it has not been spent. And what I have noticed from a lot of people that I've been working with on the state and local government level, there have been some governors who've been reluctant to provide this funding to the localities. Now, Speaker Pelosi actually provided a counter offer to the White House and said, we would come down $1 trillion if you would come up $1 trillion. That counter offer was basically, it was dead on arrival with the White House. But just earlier today, White House Chief of Staff was quoted at an event with Politico. He basically said that he doesn't feel, he's not optimistic that there is going to be a next COVID relief package completed, a deal reached until the end of September. Please note, under the federal appropriations process, fiscal year 2020 ends September 30th. The House has passed 11 out of the 12 appropriation bills. However, the Senate has not passed any. So there could possibly be a government shutdown, but this could be used as leverage to push the negotiators to get back to the table and bring together a new deal for a new COVID-19 emergency relief package. And everyone is hoping that that happens soon, because a lot of House and Senate Republican offices that I have been talking with, they really are getting heat from their constituents about the log jam with regards to negotiations, and they really want something to go forward. And then also, President Trump has been saying publicly that he wants a deal, and White House Chief of Staff has reiterated that earlier today at the Politico event. So I hope that all these things that I've just discussed and provided you with an overview is very helpful to you to understand the state of play here in Washington, D.C. and on Capitol Hill. And we are going to provide you with some links that will provide you with some information on the comparisons of these bills and how it's going to move forward. Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you, Crystal. That was really informative and a great way for us to get the event started today and set up our panel discussion. This morning, we are joined by an incredible panel of people. We are excited to welcome them, and I want to go through each one one by one. First, welcome Mike Zamor, Chief of Staff for United States Senator Jeff Merkley. Welcome Maria Ellis, who's the Executive Director of the Pacific Northwest International Trade Association. Jen Baker, Executive Director of the Columbia River Economic Development Council. James Parker with Oregon Small Business United, and Zachary Malov, Senior Policy Advisor with United States Senator Patty Murray. We know you all will have questions for this panel, and we encourage you to share them with us by using the Q&A tool at the bottom of your Zoom window. The only questions we will be reviewing will be through this tool. Please include your full name, your organization, and your location of your business when submitting your question. If you have a comment, you can share it with everyone by using the comment function. So please join me in welcoming Mike Zamor, Maria Ellis, Jen Baker, James Parker, and Zachary Malov. We'll take turns today on questions, and I'm just going to go ahead and get us started with a question for me for Mike Zamor. The current COVID-19 pandemic requires bipartisan efforts to ensure a safe and prosperous economic recovery. Yet, as we just heard, things appear to be stuck in a partisan standstill. Can you speak to any collaborative work that is taking place across the aisle and where you see a deal perhaps coming together?
Sure. Thank you, John, and thanks to everybody who's made this event possible. I want to start just with sort of a high-level overview here. I think that for an economic recovery to really get any headway, we need a few things. We need, first and foremost, to get the virus in check. We need to support families and small businesses and some larger businesses as well through the revenue collapse that they're experiencing. And then we have to get some traditional stimulus and rebuilding efforts to just jumpstart the economy and get people back buying stuff and selling stuff and engaging in commerce. The reason that the bipartisan deal has been so hard to come by this go-around is, I think, because there's not a disagreement about how to solve those three big challenges. It's really about whether to solve them. So, as Crystal mentioned, the House passed its bill, the HEROES Act, in mid-May, which is almost 4 months ago. There literally has not been a single significant COVID bill on the Senate floor since then. Since the CARES Act passed in March. So since the CARES Act passed, I think the dynamic that we have seen is that Republicans are kind of caught between several competing imperatives. So they've got the president insisting on essentially acting like nothing's wrong, and trying to basically project a sense of normalcy and that the virus has been beaten and the economy is doing great. And so a lot of Republicans who are trying to sort of toe that line. You've got some conservatives within the party who are just worried about the amount of spending that we have already had to do through previous coronavirus responses, and don't want to see the government spending more, or don't want to see the government, kind of people leaning on the government and the government solving their problems. There's sort of an ideological or maybe economic concern by some. And then you have, as Crystal also mentioned, the demands from constituents who are facing really circumstances that are unprecedented in our lifetimes and need solutions and need help. So we've got multiple factions and multiple competing priorities within the Republican Party. They don't have a single position. They can't agree amongst themselves, and that's one of the reasons you haven't seen a bill on the Senate floor. So Crystal mentioned that they unveiled this skinny proposal or this kind of package, but you'll note that it hasn't actually been voted on because the Republicans can't pass it, even amongst themselves. So the challenge that we have right now is that we don't really, and the other issue is that, Mnuchin in the past has been willing to make a deal. Mark Meadows' entire political career has been about saying no to things and trying to blow things up. He comes out of the Tea Party and the Freedom Caucus in the House. And so this is untested, or uncharted territory for him. He's not been in a position where he has to actually find common ground and try to make a deal happen. So I don't think he's been a particularly constructive party to this discussion thus far, but there's also just these other bigger factors. So we are at a place right now where there is no willingness to talk about testing, national testing resources. We've got an unwillingness to support schools in doing distance learning. The UI issues, preventing mass layoffs from the state and local government levels, addressing the housing crisis that people are experiencing. There's just a lot of big fundamental pieces that I think are necessary that as of this moment, Republicans have not been willing to start talking about how to solve. There are some areas where there's definitely been bipartisan discussion and some common ground, particularly around PPP flexibility. And there's been one effort along the way to that has passed both chambers to loosen some of the restrictions, and then we've also got several bipartisan bills to add other elements of flexibility. Senator Merkley's co-sponsoring a couple of sector-specific bipartisan efforts that would help. The Restaurants Act that Roger Wicker has introduced, which is a very impressive acronym. That's an acronym for a 10-letter word. Very impressive, although it violates one of my most important acronym rules for naming bills, which is it uses the name of the bill as one of the words in the acronym. I think that's a no-no. That's a digression. There's also a bill for relief for live music or live performance venues that's bipartisan. So there's some discussion around specific constituencies that are really clamoring and need assistance, but the overall dynamics that Crystal was describing, I think, are making getting to yes on anything very difficult. I thought that the imperative of addressing the economy would create some shared interest in solving these problems. And, obviously we're Democrats and Republicans, and we see the world very differently. We have different constituencies that we care about. There's ideological gaps that make it hard to agree on things, but in a crisis when unemployment's in double digits and 180,000 Americans are dead, I thought that we would still have some of the continuation of that sort of spirit of finding common ground that we had in the beginning of the year. It does seem that President Trump and most of his party have decided that the economy is good enough. They think they can ride it out politically. And so they have sort of doubled down on the idea of trying to convince voters that they've beaten these problems rather than actually trying to put further solutions in place. That may change. I think a lot of this depends on where the economy goes, where the virus goes, and where the polls go. There's a lot of room to negotiate, I think, over how to do the things that need to be done. But as of now, there's just really very little incentive, it seems, on the GOP side to get to a solution, because they've cast their lot with trying to sell people on that they've already been successful and they've won this battle.
I'll weigh in really quickly here, just with a slight caveat. Mike, that was exhaustive, and I agree with everything you said for the most part. But I think in addressing the sort of the meat of the question, which is what is out there that's bipartisan, and maybe why haven't we seen more bipartisan efforts around these negotiations? And I think a lot of that is because without a top line number, and both leaders of both parties have been clear about this, without a top line number between Republicans and Democrats, really between Democrats and the White House, it's really hard for the actual legislative process to begin. So the committee chairs haven't been able to negotiate with each other because they don't know what the parameters in which they're negotiating. And so until we have that figure that sort of lays out what the size of the package is going to be, there's not a lot of negotiating that can happen, and therefore there's really not a whole lot of bipartisan deal making that you're going to see.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I appreciate that you said exhaustive and not exhausting. So thank you.
I'll type in because I think I have my next question, and this one is to Zach. A critical piece for our businesses and higher education institutions is the topic of liability. So how is Congress thinking about ensuring that once we open, our businesses and higher education institutions aren't forced to close once again because of potential liability over people contracting COVID?
Yeah, thanks for the question. Really important issue. And I should, before I go any further, I should thank everyone for being here and for having us on to give our, some of our thoughts and input here, even though if they're just opinions at this point, because the fact is nobody knows that much. But on liability, yeah, I mean, it's certainly I'm sure everyone participating and listening here knows the stakes for Republicans around liability. They've made it clear, probably above all else, that is their bright line. And the proposal that we have seen from Republicans on liability is incredibly broad. I mean, it rolls back civil and labor laws that don't actually have anything in particular to do with the COVID crisis. And so, our response has been, I don't think you can get to a place where you're talking about liability protections for businesses and schools and other organizations that are reopening until it's actually safe to reopen. And so, Senator Murray has always been clear, specifically when talking about, higher ed, that, if you're providing some type of blanket liability, you're essentially just telling folks it's okay if students and workers get sick. And that's not really a place that we're comfortable going at all. So, we have talked about, unfortunately, a lot of federal agencies have made clear they're not going to provide the federal guidelines that we absolutely need in terms of safe ways to reopen and bring back workers. We have asked them to do so. We've asked them to do so. We've talked to, we've talked to the CDC in particular about establishing clear guidelines and clear metrics that organizations and schools can use, so they can, put a process in place for safety reopening. But in the absence of that, I mean, frankly, I think if you did that, and some folks a lot smarter than me have testified in front of Congress. If we were to establish these guidelines, you'd actually probably eliminate the need for liability protection, because you would actually have something in writing. You have this guidance that essentially has the force of law. But in the absence of that, this is something I think we're certainly going to have to. This is going to be a big fight, and it's certainly something we will have to negotiate over. I don't know how willing Republicans are to move off of where they currently stand in what they've proposed, but I think it's something that needs to be negotiated. And again, I don't think Democrats are unwilling to negotiate here. I mean, I think we're willing to have a conversation, but we're not willing to accept simply what's been given to us by Senate Republicans.
Thanks so much for that response, Zach. I'm Jen Baker with CREDC. At CREDC, we know that our ability to cultivate, recruit, and retain top talent directly correlates with our ability to recruit and retain company and business investment in the region. And so my question is for Mike, and has to do with higher education. So across all of higher education nationally, estimates are that institutions have a total of 46.6 billion in increased student need and lost revenues, and will spend at least 73.8 billion on new expenditures specific to the COVID-19 pandemic. What are the prospects of additional federal relief for higher education?
Thank you for that question and for the work you do. Clearly a big need, and we know that public higher ed funding has never really recovered from the deep cuts that happened after the last recession. So universities are starting close to the bone as it is, and as you're saying, tons of revenue hits as well as new expenses associated with this unique circumstance. So we actually, in Senator Merkley's office, kind of felt like we were in Oregon kind of at the leading edge of the tsunami on this, because Oregon's quarter system meant our universities were facing some dire situations and student shutdowns earlier than many that are on the semester system. It kind of kicked in May, and so already by April we were in a state of slight panic about this, and pushed hard to get some money into the CARES Act in March for universities, and are continuing to work to try to make sure that there's higher ed funding. Senator Murray, of course, as Zach can speak more to this, has been an absolute, kind of pit bull about trying to make sure that universities and higher ed, institutions of higher education get funding they need. I know the HEROES Act had a big chunk change, roughly 26, I think, $26 billion for higher ed. And the Republicans actually had some money for higher ed as well. So I do think this is one of those areas where you have some potential for bipartisan agreement if, again, as Zach said, and we can get a top line number, and we can get the overall dynamics of the negotiation to a place where there's something happening. I think that there's a prospect that we could have some support here for higher education. One of the things that we are concerned about, particularly in the context of K-12, but I think we need to watch it in higher ed as well, is the administration has been talking about trying to use federal funding as leverage to force institutions to open, regardless of the guidance from scientists and medical professionals. Needless to say, I hope, my boss, and I'm sure Senator Murray, and I think pretty much all the Democrats in Congress feel like we've got to follow the science and let health professionals be making sure that we're making smart decisions here. And the fact that the University of Oregon or University of Washington or any other institution is educating people remotely does not cut their costs and the expenses that they're facing. So we are strong advocates for making sure that education funding reaches both institutions of higher ed and K-12 institutions, regardless of how they're delivering their education, because the needs are going to be huge. And then last I would just mention is Senator Murray took the lead on introducing, along with Senator Schumer and Senator Merkley and a bunch of others in our caucus, a huge proposal for childcare and education that included, I believe, $132 billion for higher education to help get through the crisis. So with a particular focus on tribal colleges, minority serving institutions, HBCUs, some of the schools that are serving high need populations or are themselves, in less financially secure situations. So, we're fingers crossed on this one. I hope that we can get some help and do it before it's too late for some of these schools.
Well, thank you so much for that work. That bleeds a little bit into my second question, which is in our coordination with local chambers and Association of Washington Business and Main Street Associations. Childcare is a topic at the forefront. And we know that it's essential to any economic recovery plan, yet most states have a lack of childcare available to working adults, making it complicated for people to get back to work as businesses start to reopen. Zach, maybe you could share a little bit more about Senator Murray's work on childcare and how we can propose to support this critical industry.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this has been, I think, one of the highest priorities and largest points of emphasis for Senator Murray throughout this whole pandemic, especially as more and more people are starting to go back to work, and more states are planning to reopen various sectors of the economy. And Senator Murray has argued, I think absolutely correctly, that you can't go back to work if you don't have a foundation of childcare in place. And the simple fact is, during the pandemic, childcare centers have been some of the hardest hit of any. Some of them have been not forced to remain open, but some of them have been allowed to remain open in order to receive children of essential workers and things of that nature. But it's been a fraction of what they normally, the volume that they normally see. And so childcare centers, much like other hard-hit industries, are in a lot of trouble. And so in recognizing this, as part of the education package that Mike talked about a little just in the last question, She proposes a $50 billion childcare fund for childcare centers around the country. It's called the Childcare is Essential Act. Essentially what it does is facilitates grants to states through the governor's office, who then facilitate the funds to the local agencies after conducting a few checks on the recipients. But I mean, essentially the goal is to recognize how critical these childcare centers are in the grand scheme of things, especially if folks are starting to go back to work as they are in many states. And I think one of the keys also to this is a negotiation with Republicans. I mean, I think as we were discussing some bipartisan areas, I think Republicans have started to realize this. And they included, I can't remember if it was the skinny or if it was in heels or whatever they're calling their proposals. They included, I think, $15 billion in funding for childcare, which we would argue is a far cry from what's needed. But we do think and we do hope that there's a little bit of a foundation of consensus there, and so that's certainly something we're going to be working toward as we negotiate this next COVID relief package.
And good afternoon, everyone. Good to see you all. And thanks to all the partners for hosting this important discussion. My name is James Parker. I'm here with the Oregon Small Business United. I'm also the executive director for the Oregon Native American Chamber. A priority identified it early and often from our membership and our small business community is really care for their employees. It's been a balancing act for businesses to care for their employees as an important part of the business function and kind of as part of the larger community, while also making sound business decisions. Mike, what do you see happening for unemployment benefits? Is there a way to construct the extension so it incentivizes employment for people while also making sure we provide a sufficient safety net for those who lose their jobs or continue to not find employment?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, and obviously a hot topic for lots of businesses and lots of families. So, the idea behind when negotiations were occurring back in the early spring around UI was, let's try to make employees whole and recognize that we're asking people not to work, not to go in, and so nobody should be penalized. And this isn't about like going out and trying to get them to find a different job. It's like the whole economy is going into a deep freeze. So let's try to keep everybody whole. The Labor Department, from the Trump administration, told the negotiators, states can't do that. They do not have the technical capacity to calculate the lost income and make people whole. For those of you, I don't know what's happened in Washington, but those of you on the Oregon side know that any changes to the UI system apparently come tough, because Oregon has really struggled to make unemployment work with changes that were in fact implemented. So in lieu of making each individual whole, the $600 pandemic unemployment assistance program was set up to basically average making a worker whole. And it's obviously math that varies a lot household to household. So on any given person may be making a little bit less or a little bit more than they were making when they were working. And that's just sort of the byproduct of the technology. Our feeling is that cutting back on family incomes right now would be a huge economic anchor when we can least afford it. And that's less money in people's pockets for rent or groceries or car repairs or, any of the other things that help keep the economy going. So we think that we should be continuing that program at least for a while, given where we are. And the data suggests that more generous UI benefits in a crisis like this have not, in aggregate, dampened people's willingness to go back to work. But I'm sure that many of you and we as well have heard anecdotes and certainly at a just sort of in terms of logic and thinking about the reality of it, if somebody's got more money to not go into work and also face the risks of COVID or childcare problems or what have you, like, you can understand the temptation. So one of the things that we've been looking at, Senator Merkley, Senator Murphy from Connecticut, and Senator Van Hollen from Maryland put something together called the Rebuilding Main Street Act. And the idea was to take sort of a combo of some of the PPP features and use work share programs within UI to try to take another approach to helping small businesses who are facing big revenue hits support their workers and keep the lights on. And so expanding work share allows basically the federal support allows unemployment to scale up and down with salary changes, so that as workers are picking up hours or losing hours, the UI is helping them basically stay whole. And then the program that we were suggesting also has grants to help businesses maintain the overhead and keep the lights on. So, I think that there's other ways of doing this. There's ways of kind of meeting the same objectives without using the unemployment system directly. So Senator Hawley from Missouri and Councilman Jayapal from Washington and others have proposed ideas that would have the government basically helping businesses keep people on payrolls. This is what a lot of countries, Germany did this, some other countries in Europe have done this. And if the goal here is to just keep the economy rolling and not let it seize up, then there's a lot to be said for just let people keep getting their paychecks. The challenge I think for us is that that's going to be a big number that I think the Republicans will have trouble swallowing, and B, we are down the road with PPP, we're down the road with UI. And so I think at this point, we're probably best off trying to just structure some systems that help those programs, do the best they can to keep businesses, going, to keep families whole or close to it, and try to calibrate, as best we can to avoid some of the unintended consequences that people are concerned about.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. That's really valuable insight. Appreciate the response. And kind of as we continue on uncertainty in employment and small business, it was well documented that federal assistance was not initially reaching underserved communities, small businesses, and really those lacking strong ties to lending institutions. However, those that were able to access federal assistance in the form of forgivable loans, communication and clarity were lacking in the process for forgiveness. To ensure our small businesses were not adding long-term debt during a time of great uncertainty, and with lenders, tax attorneys, and accounting professionals grappling with how to counsel their clients on the topic of PPP forgiveness. Zach, what types of measures is Congress contemplating to help small businesses emerge confidently? Additionally, maybe see another round of PPP before the end of the year? And what about payment deferment on SBA loans and complete forgiveness of PPP to keep cash available for business operations?
Yeah, thanks, James. I think those are all really important questions, and I as you talked a little bit about some of the difficulties, especially early on with PPP, I sort of laughed to myself because I can't tell you how many conversations I had with the SBA, with our small business committee in the Senate, and others who simply could not, who were just having so much trouble getting these applications processed, making sure the money was going to the businesses that truly needed it. And then answering very simple questions. I mean, there seems like there's a new FAQ that comes out from SBA and Treasury every single week or more. And so folks are still guessing about this process, and they're still trying to figure out exactly how to have, if they've received a PPP, then they're trying to figure out how the forgiveness process is going to work. If they have not, they're probably still trying to access the program. So I think there is a broad agreement, like Mike talked about a little earlier, and like we talked about already. I mean, I think it feels like on PPP and a lot of the small business provisions that will likely be included in the next relief package, it seems like we do have a little bit of a foundation for agreement and consensus in where we want to go. I think both parties have determined that we need to reauthorize the program, probably provide a bit more money for the program. I think both sides agree that there need to be, careful set-asides for certain types of lenders and for certain types of communities. We saw early on with PPP that the smallest businesses and businesses in underserved areas, minority business, tribal businesses, veteran and women-owned businesses simply weren't having the same access as other businesses were. And so that's a conversation that we've had quite a bit since the initial rollout of PPP. And Democrats have talked a lot about streamlining the forgiveness process, making it quite a bit easier, quite a bit more simple for businesses of a certain size. Maybe you take a certain threshold of loan size, and you fast track the forgiveness process for businesses under that threshold. We've talked about setting aside new money for community development financial institutions and minority depository institutions. So that's something we focused on as well. To their credit, Republicans have been more receptive to those types of efforts. So I think on some of those items you mentioned, SBA deferral as well, I do think that there is a bit of agreement. Again, we have to answer before we can get to a place where we're comfortable saying, yeah, we have a product here that we're going to support and that we like. We need to answer some of the bigger questions on some of the other items we've talked about. But I think that there is a good amount of progress that's been made on PPP and some of the small business provisions.
So I have the last question, and I know we're a little bit behind schedule, but this question is for both of you. And I'm really excited about this because with my Panita hat, this is about trade. As you know, roughly 89% of trading firms in Washington and Oregon are small and medium-sized enterprises, and they are critical to our economy. COVID has had direct impact on their ability to get their products to market. The trade wars have really, that were predating COVID, were really having an impact to begin with. So what we're seeing now is a lot of firms that have had their long-term relationships, trading relationships impacted. They've lost some market access. And now we're seeing COVID has highlighted the importance of needing to ensure that global supply chains are built in with some redundancy to make them more resilient. So the question for you is, how is Congress thinking about specifically helping firms recover market access or gain new market access and supporting them in their diversification of the supply chains to make them more resilient?
Zach, you want to take the first go at this?
Sure. I'm sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, Mike, I'll be super quick here. Yeah, I mean, Maria, like you said, and thanks for the question. It's a really important one for both our states. We're both as trade dependent as they come. I've said that a million times. I think Washington State is the most trade dependent state in the entire country. But yeah, I mean, this administration's move toward isolationism and protectionism, and really, I mean, a slightly self-destructive trade policy agenda has been really hard for a lot of our exporters and our importers. Especially with those companies who do business in the Pacific Rim and in other parts of Asia. It's been a slog, and like you said, it started before the pandemic. I mean, global trade volumes are down dramatically since then, but that was maybe not a continuation of the exact trend, but certainly we saw downward trade volumes in the last 4 years. But I mean, I think one of the biggest things we can do is to stop thinking so unilaterally and start working again with our allies, with our trade partners, and with the other states and members of Congress who also rely on the type of global commerce that Washington and Oregon do. So I think there's obviously been a reevaluation of supply chains and locations of certain suppliers for certain products in the wake of the pandemic, and businesses probably need to reevaluate, as is the federal government, where we source our materials from, and if we source our materials from one single place. But I do think if the federal government were to get maybe too involved recalibrating a lot of the supply chains that exist. I mean, we want to encourage manufacturing here. We want to encourage onshoring and domestic production as much as possible. But I do think we want to be cautious how much we really entrench ourselves in that direction. And I think but I do think we'll have an opportunity, whether it's in the next administration or the next Congress, hopefully to do some more of that.
Yeah, that all resonates, and I think what I would add to it is that Senator Merkley will come as no surprise to folks here, probably has long been a proponent of trying to bring more manufacturing back to the United States, of trying to bring some of our supply chains back to the United States, and I think that this pandemic has shown us sort of some of the dangers of relying solely or almost exclusively on supply chains that are concentrated in places that we don't necessarily have the ability to influence them and keep those supply chains stable. So I think that there's a long-term question here about that Senator Merkley's been trying to push us to think about, which is how do we want to structure our traded relationships? And he agrees with the assessment that Zach said of that the unilateral kind of protectionism that the Trump administration has pursued has not been constructive, and it hasn't been particularly strategic. And I think that the question is, how do we structure those relationships in a way that creates more balance and helps keep some more components of that supply chain domestic. The other piece that I think we haven't talked a lot about, but really is another vulnerability within our economy, the whole structure of our economy right now, and deserves more attention, is the concentration. And in almost every field, we've had consolidation, and you've got a couple of huge players that control the vast majority of the market, and so those that concentration not only creates economic kind of power imbalances that I think end up really limiting the growth potential for lots of small businesses, but also mean that if there's a problem with that supplier or that component of the ecosystem, you got issues. And so, I mean, we've all seen those days when Amazon Web Services suddenly has a problem, and suddenly you can't get Google, you can't get Evernote, that has happened in the supply chain for PPE, and that's how, there's people dead because of that. It's a problem that we and Senator Merkley have been working hard to try to make sure that we don't have those problems in the vaccine supply chain, as we suddenly try to get hundreds of billions of vaccines distributed in a really short order. But when you only have a couple of suppliers of medical glass in the world anymore, that makes the sourcing challenges hard, and also gives them incredible economic leverage over kind of the public interest. So I think we got to look at how we structure our economy and what we expect it to do and who we expect it to work for. And that goes, I think that, crisis exposes some of your weaknesses. And I think that in this case, some of the weaknesses of the U.S. economy as currently structured have been exposed for all of us to see.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we could continue to talk about this for much longer, but unfortunately, we've actually gone a little over and run out of time. It was incredibly in-depth conversation, and I just want to thank everyone. We did get one really good question, and I want to acknowledge that we got that question from Business for a Better Portland. So Mike and Zach, we will send it to you and work to get an answer to that question for BBPDX, okay? Since we don't have time to get to it today. But just thank you to this panel. Thank you to Zach and Mike for those really in-depth questions. This was a great discussion, and we're really glad to have hosted it today. So we want to just end by thanking everyone who tuned in for this discussion, and make sure you register for our September forum on September 16th. This forum is going to be dedicated to exploring the work needed to advance Black economic prosperity for our region. We have an amazing panel, and it should just be an incredible discussion. So we hope you'll go to portlandalliance.com to register for that event. And as we mentioned, we will continue to share updates with you on our website, and a video of this discussion will be available on our website for you to share with others who weren't able to make it today. So thank you one last time to our panel, and stay healthy, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.